We have three guests to help kick this off today. Julie Sweitzer is the College Readiness Consortium Director at the University of Minnesota, and a friend. Julie and I have served on the St. Louis Park School Board for 11 years together, and so it's a pleasure to welcome her, and she is a familiar face here at AMSD. Meredith Fergus is with the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, and Cara Arzamendia, sorry, Cara, is also from the Minnesota Department of Education, and we welcome the three of them here today to discuss SLEDS with us.
Thank you, Bruce. I should also mention that I'm a board member at WEMIP, the West Metro Education Programs, because that's formerly how I've been attending AMSD over the last year. In an era where obtaining a job that pays you a living wage and the potential for supporting a family and a career, when that increasingly requires obtaining a post-secondary degree or certificate from a 2-year, a 4-year, or a technical college, high schools and school districts need to start measuring our success on whether we have prepared our students to be successful in post-secondary education. Yet all of the data that we have, that we collect within our districts and at the Minnesota Department of Education, has until now largely stopped with the day that our students walk out of our high schools. We've had one opportunity with the National Student Clearinghouse to get some data on how students are doing in post-secondary, but you had to pay extra for that, and that was our only source. Not everybody obtained that. So years ago, the state, through the P20 partnership, which is an alliance of all the K-12 and higher ed institutions and associations, worked with the federal government and got a grant to develop what has come to be known as SLEDS, the State Longitudinal Educational Database System. The last S must be system. And it is going to start making it possible for school districts to answer questions about what happens with our students after they graduate, and for researchers to explore all sorts of questions about what factors make them successful, and therefore give us advice at the K-12 level as to what we can do to better prepare students. So today's session is about showing you, this just went live this summer, and the people that really know how it works and the brains that created it and operate it, Meredith and Cara, are going to explain it to you. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to, which one first? Cara Arzamendia from the Department of Education.
Thanks, Julie. I just have a couple of slides that we want to show you this morning to kind of give folks who haven't heard about SLEDS before, our project, a little bit of idea of the background and kind of the history, what's involved in SLEDS, and then we're going to move right into a demo of our new SLEDS Analytics website that Julie was saying just went live this past summer, so you all can see what kind of data is in SLEDS and what kind of reports and different things you can do with the information. Oh, sorry. With that, oops, my apologies. There we go. All right. So this is the vision of SLEDS. You can see that SLEDS really tries to capture or identify those predictors of long-term student success. So as students move through our different public systems, K-12, post-secondary, and on into workforce, what are those milestones or transition points where students are either meeting or failing to meet different benchmarks? So as they graduate from high school, enter into college, and then go on into their first job. So looking at those pathways for individuals in achieving successful outcomes. SLEDS is trying to enable research to identify predictors of long-term student success, so really try to capture what it is, what's that recipe that certain students have that make them successful, design targeted improvement strategies, improve data-driven decision-making, so really provide information for folks like you and policymakers to have the information that you need in order to be better informed, and then to meet federal funding requirements. This is the data that's included in SLEDS. You can see we've sectioned it off by agency. We load data into the SLEDS system twice a year, every November, which is what we're in the process of doing right now, and then every May. And we do that because different data sets become available at different times during the year as we're releasing different information. You can see we also have some data sets that come from other sources outside of our 3 state agencies, the GED results, the National Student Clearinghouse data, and then I should mention too that the advanced placement and international baccalaureate information that we've just recently added into SLEDS also comes from outside sources. And then this is the 4 Ps, as we like to call them, of our state research agenda. The first is pathways, so it's that movement I was talking about of individual students as they work through the different systems. And that's to answer questions such as who enrolls in college and when, and what industries employ college graduates and at what ages. And then also looking at the progress, so those benchmarks or transition points that I was talking about, where either students will meet or fail to meet those transitions. So how many choose college, how many choose work, which students roll in developmental education once they enroll in college, and then the different predictors, so the characteristics or patterns that we have of those different student groups that are able to meet those transition points, looking at different demographics, looking at things like intermediate versus delayed entry into post-secondary education. And then also performance, how well are we able to meet the needs of students so that they can have successful outcomes. These are some of the current SLEDS products. We're going to walk you through the SLEDS mobile analytics site today. It's really an exciting thing for us to actually be able to see the data kind of coming out of the system. I think for the last few years we've been working really hard among our agencies to figure out how to get the data into the system and link it all together and what that needs to look like. And now we're at the point finally where we can start getting information out to folks like you and to the public. We also have another report, the first report that used SLEDS data. It was looking at developmental education in our post-secondary system for Minnesota public high school graduates. And then we also have with DEED another tool that looks at graduate employment outcomes. And that's a really great tool we're not going to be showing today, but I would encourage all of you to go to that website and look. It looks at employment outcomes of college graduates 1 and 2 years after graduation. So you can look up where they're working, their wages, that kind of information. And so with that, I'm going to get us into the, live website. Here we go, we've got it all brought up. So this is what the live website looks like. No, that's okay. So you can see this has our vision and our mission statement of SLEDS. So folks kind of know when they come to our site who we are and what we're about. Over on the right-hand side is our contact information. The really great thing about this site is it's mobile first design, which means that if you're using your laptop or your desktop computer, this will show up just like you're seeing now, but also if you're using your smartphone or a tablet or your iPad, whatever device you're on, this will kind of accommodate that. So it's something you can use if you're out and about or sitting in your office. So it's really, really flexible that way. Over here on the left-hand side, you can see these are the reports we have currently available. We're planning to add to this list as we go and roll out more information. So right underneath our homepage, we have another link. It's the research page. Here you can see kind of the behind the scenes what goes into SLEDS. We have our data dictionary. This allows you to look at all of the variables that we have in SLEDS. We have over 1,000 variables in SLEDS. And you can look at them all. We have them all posted by data set. So if you're interested, for example, in what information do we have as far as K-12 assessment, if you put that up, then you can see a list of all of the variables that are included within that data set. And we put this and made this public so that researchers, as they're thinking about ways they can use SLEDS data, they can go in and look at this to see what exactly we have and to be able to figure out the data that they need in order to answer their questions. Now, let me see. Also on the research page, we have our data governance explanation, and then below that is a copy of our full data governance information to let folks know about our structure and how we work. And then we have information for researchers requesting access to SLEDS data. So folks that are interested in filling out research requests can do that right online. below this, we also have other information about what's going on in other states as far as other systems, P20 systems, the links to our Getting Prepared report, and then the Graduate Employment Outcomes tool that I was talking about. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Meredith?
Yes, I would add that the National Student Clearinghouse. The one thing many of you may not know is that the state actually purchased a statewide subscription to the National Student Clearinghouse. So if you purchase it through your district, the bonus you get from that subscription is you get data about a year earlier than we can provide it. Because I have to wait for the Department of Ed to load all the graduates and provide a file that we then send to the Student Clearinghouse. But for those of you who do not have a National Student Clearinghouse subscription, if you click on that link, you'll be taken to the Office of Higher Education's website, and we put all reports for all high schools in Minnesota for the most recent 8 classes of graduates on that site for you to download. So just so you're aware, that resource is available as well.
Great. And then, do you want me just to bring them?
Yep.
I'm gonna go right into the first report. Oh, sorry, right into enrollment, and then I'm gonna kind of walk you through the beginning of this, and then I'm gonna turn things over to Meredith to kind of talk more through the details. So this is what the website looks like. Let me get rid of that. For those of you who have been on the Minnesota Department of Education's website and looked at the Minnesota report card, this design is very similar. So if you've been on that site and played around, this site is pretty much the same type of setup. It always defaults to the statewide data, but if you want to look at a particular school or district's data, you can just type it right in there. And then the high school graduation year. So we have from 2012 going back all the way to 2006 for high school graduates. I should say that how we define high school graduates in SLEDS is different than how the Minnesota Department of Education defines its 4-year cohort graduation rate. So that's not what this is. This is just looking at students in a given year, how many graduated, so how many had that end code of graduation. So it's a little bit different in the calculation. We're working to develop a 4-year cohort rate that's similar to what the Department of Ed has, but we haven't done that yet. That's in the works. So you can see, and I'm just going to type in, since we're in Roseville, here is the college enrollment information for the state, Roseville Public School District, and then Roseville Area Senior High School. For students that are going to college, graduates that go to college in Minnesota and outside of Minnesota. And you can compare. Some of the neat functionality is if you're not interested in those that went outside of Minnesota, you can click and on and off. You have that functionality. And also just if you want to know about what it is that you're looking at, you can click on a definition of the report. And also up in here, we hope to, at the beginning of next year, have more options as far as demographics, being able to drill down into different student groups. So looking at things like race and ethnicity, how do those students fare in different high schools and districts in the state. I think I'm going to turn it over to you now to kind of walk through the rest of the reports. Does that sound good? All right.
Great. So I am Meredith Fergus with the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, and I like to kind of tell you the data story. These are just bar charts, but the data story is really kind of cool. The one thing I want to say, though, that Kara and I emphasize usually, is that SLEDS is a work in progress. It is not going to provide you perfect data today. We need to know from you how to make it better. So what doesn't look right and what is missing that you want us to add. So that is what we need from our schools, as well as our colleges and our business community. The first thing about enrollment is a lot of times we assume that a higher level of academic preparation means that you have a higher percentage of students going to college, and that is correct. But the other thing you need to know is when you have a higher percentage of students going to college, you also have a higher percentage of students who go out of state for college because they have expanded options available to them. So a lot of times you'll see both the green bar grow as well as the size of the total bar. The other thing we always want to know, and I should say this is measuring enrollment in fall after high school graduation. A lot of times we do focus on 1 to 2 years after high school graduation, but in terms of preparing Minnesota's workforce, SLEDS is actually focused on 8 years after graduation to age 25. Do any of you know how many high school graduates go to post-secondary education by age 25? We're starting at 69% in the fall. Anyone want to guess how high it goes? Keep going. 86. I wish it was 95. It probably will be within like a decade or two. But 86% of Minnesota public high school graduates go on to post-secondary education by age 25. And by that we mean formal post-secondary education. So we're not even picking up those that go into some sort of on-the-job training or short-term vocational training. 86%. Our post-secondary participation rate is one of the highest in the country. So that's one good thing to keep in mind. We are doing a great job of transitioning students from high school graduation into post-secondary by age 25. 25 matters because age 25 is when we start collecting educational attainment data for the state. And if we can get students into post-secondary and out of post-secondary by age 25, we have a higher educational attainment rate, and higher educational attainment means higher per capita income and a more skilled economy and workforce for Minnesota. So that's the longer term linkages we like to make. The other thing we like to look at is where students go to college. So in terms of where students go to college for your school, what do you think the number one thing that matters is? Geography. Most high school graduates will go to post-secondary within 100 miles of their home. So your strongest post-secondary K-12 partnerships are going to be with your local community colleges and your local universities. So as we look down into the top 10 colleges attended, I'm sure now many of you can guess where Roseville students go. Anyone want to take a shot? University of Minnesota. It's actually Century. It's about the same distance, I would bet, from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Also, St. Paul Community and Technical College is a high. Again, the geography factor there. You do notice, though, that Roseville also sends students to Wisconsin-Madison, North Dakota, St. Thomas, and Hamlin. Again, a wide picture. The cool thing is, in this report, we are combining data from the Office of Higher Education and the National Student Clearinghouse. So the National Student Clearinghouse will pick up about 93% of Minnesota colleges, but they will pick up the larger colleges outside of Minnesota as well. The Office of Higher Education actually picks up all of those smaller vocational and technical programs within the state. So we can tell you who's going to the Transportation Center for Excellence, the School of Taxidermy, as well as the number of cosmetology schools in the state. And a lot of times we laugh about those smaller vocational programs, but those programs do lead to jobs. And so that's a critical part of our post-secondary system. In terms of credits taken in college, the one thing we like to keep in mind is about on-time post-secondary completion. Students need to graduate in 4 years if they want to get a bachelor's degree. Why? It saves them money. It also saves us in terms of time and efficiency in getting them through in an efficient manner. To graduate on time with a bachelor's degree in 4 years, students must take at least 15 credits or more each semester. As you can see from the blue bar, the majority of Minnesota public high school graduates, when they enter college in the fall, are on track for on-time completion of post-secondary. So that is a great thing to see. The purple represents 12 to 14 credits. This is the standard the U.S. Department of Education imposes on students for full-time enrollment, and it's actually a challenge for us, because if you take 12 credits, you will finish in 5 years, not 4, and that's something we're trying to fix overall. So now, what's the follow-up question? You don't just want to know, did they enroll in college, right? Exactly. We want to know, did they complete? So we're going to stick with Roseville High School here. And I'm sorry, Roseville, if you think we're picking on you. But we're going to jump back to the class of 2008. So the first thing we look at in higher ed is, when do we lose students that you send to us? Because it's a big factor. You take the time to get them to college, and then all of a sudden they're not making it through to completion. So what we can see here, if we're looking, and I'm going to scroll down so you see the percentages. Between first and second year, 87% of Roseville graduates made it to the second year. That means 13% dropped out. If you compare second year to third year, 78% made it to the third year. We just lost another 9%. If you're talking third year to fourth year, it's now 71%. We lost another 7% of graduates. So within the first 3 years after high school, post-secondary has lost 29% of the graduates you sent to us and we enrolled. That's a problem for us. And that's where the Office of Higher Education is focusing our policy these days. In terms of degree completion, if we can't get them to second, third, and fourth year, we're certainly not getting them to graduation. So let's look how many graduate. In terms of Roseville, 50% of students complete a degree or certificate as of May of 2014. So that's 5 years after the class of 2008 left you. 50% of high school graduates completed any certificate or degree within 5 years. Those 50%, 45 of them actually completed a 2-year degree, and 35% completed a 4-year degree. For us, those numbers are too low, and that's where we need to focus our attention. But this will tell you that for educational attainment purposes, we did get half of them through into some sort of credentialed. The one thing you need to know for sustainable wages and sustainable employment in Minnesota is a credential matters. Whether it's a 1-year vocational certificate or a bachelor's degree or a PhD, credential matters. So getting them at least to a 1-year certificate is our goal. The other thing we're going to look at again is time to completion. So because the class of 2008, the data that's loaded into SLEDS is 5 years. So for 5 years, what we show you is that 32% of that 52% finished in 4 years. So even though we enrolled them at the full-time level in the first term after college, we didn't do so well keeping them at the full-time level later. The second thing is the 50% had completed a certificate or degree by the 5th year, by this May. So that's where I'm going to pause. Are there questions? The cool thing for us is that we're using this to inform what we do on the post-secondary level, as well as hoping to provide all of this information back to you for the K-12 level.
I'm wondering how reliable this post-secondary data is. How do you track a kid going from Roseville to Cincinnati, for example?
Oh, that is a great question. So we actually use individual level data. So we have a student's MARS number, their first name, last name, and their date of birth, which is provided through the Department of Education. From the post-secondary education, we actually get their first name, their last name, their date of birth. If the college is in Minnesota, we do pick up their MARS number, but we also pick up their social security number. And that social security number sometimes allows us to track, because we receive some data at the Office of Higher Education on all Minnesota students if they complete the FAFSA. And so we can do a better job of linking. It's not perfect though. So as you know, we have a lot of populations that may use the same date of birth. January 1st is our favorite date of birth, right? Also, there are name commonalities. We actually had a large discussion about how to handle twins yesterday. Twins, they tend to be too alike to tell that they're two different people. And so we encounter these technical difficulties that force us to go back to IT and rework. But it's essentially what's called a probabilistic matching algorithm. So what's the probability that two people are the same person? The good news is in Minnesota, because our colleges are picking up the MARS number, it's a higher level of validity. But that's a great question.
Are you tracking why the students are dropping out? So is it because they ran out of money, they lost their daycare? I mean, how are you making informed decisions based on this information if you're not doing some kind of interviews with the kids to find out why they're not staying?
Some of our colleges actually do interviews. A lot of it, though, is based on just long-term longitudinal research with students. We don't include any sort of survey data into SLED, so I'm relying on what we've learned from previous research. We do know typically there are 2 reasons students drop out of college. One, academics. They start failing a class, or there's some sort of academic issue. They may not feel at home at the institution. It leads to an academic issue. The second is always finances. Students may not be able to gather the financial resources to pay for college in Minnesota, or they may be working in order to cover home expenses, childcare, those other expenses, and just simply cannot afford the tuition side of the equation in terms of time or money. So those are the top 2 reasons students drop out. We are beginning a lot of work on how we can improve those outcomes for students at the Office of Higher Education, and how we can work with our institutions to kind of do a better job of serving students both academically and financially in Minnesota. So that is an area of new research for us, or ongoing research, I should say. Great.
So we know some of our students are only taking programs that are 1 or 2 years.
Correct.
But we're tracking them as though they were in a 4-year institution. And stating that they dropped out, they had completed 4 years. So how do we, because it's not exactly the same measure, is it?
actually, the persistence rate would count successful completion of a vocational program as persisted. So the 50% who graduated are included in the 71%, even if they finished a one-year degree. We do track students regardless of what degree program or program of study they enter into. So we would consider a completed one-year degree as a successful outcome. But you're right, I need to change the text on the top of the chart to reflect that better. So that's exactly the kind of feedback we need.
And you're catching them in degree completion.
We do catch them in degree completion. The actual model that I think we're building on in Minnesota is that students start with a short-term degree, a one-year certificate, but then we stack our programs in a manner that allow them to easily move a couple years later to a 2-year AA and maybe a few years after that to a bachelor's degree, which involves transfer credit alignment and making sure that our colleges are working together as a system.
And on that note, if I could just continue. So we have some of our high schools now that are actually partnering up with community colleges to provide high school graduates with an AA degree.
Yes.
Are you able to measure that?
Yes, those are actually counted in here. So if your student receives an AA degree before they finish high school, they are still counted as a successful completer. So actually, they would show up in the 1 year. So if we were to flip Roseville, though I think Mounds View might be a better target for this one. If we were to flip Roseville to 2011, because there's a lag in our data, remember, and we flip down to completers, you do see a few.
You might have said this, but are the private, kind of the for-profit data included in that?
Yes, the Minnesota data as well as the National Student Clearinghouse will include both public and private colleges. And for Minnesota, that does mean we do pick up all of the private cosmetology schools as well as like Globe University, Rasmussen, all of the major private for-profit providers in Minnesota. We are only one of a handful of states that does that. So as other states build these systems, they are going to be missing that gap. And so we're ahead of them in that game.
It seems like with all the personal data involved, what kind of security is available in the database? Because we hear in the news every day of databases hacked in and identities and so on.
Correct. That is it's something we worry about every day as well. We do rely on MINIT, the Minnesota Information Technology Services Division within the state. SLEDS resides in a state data system. In fact, Kara and I cannot get access to it right now. So it's pretty locked down. Most of the research we do uses de-identified or anonymized data. So we do separate out personal information from non-personal information for research purposes and have strict protocols about how that's handled. But again, we worry about it every day.
Can I just add too that once the data is linked, so we go through this linking mechanism, once it's linked, then the data gets stripped of all of its personally identifiable information, which is that date of birth, first name, last name, and it's stored in the data warehouse as stripped data, so it's de-identified. So if someone hacked into the system, they wouldn't be able to find that personally identifiable information.
Correct. The one challenge with that, though, is you probably want to know what's happened to your students, correct? So we have to figure out a way to how to provide this data back to you in a manner that allows you to identify which students are which in our models. And so that's where we now have to figure out the other side of the technology equation.
I think you said something about you were gonna follow after 8 years or something, because the ultimate thing is at the end of 4, 5, 6, whatever, to damage God.
Correct.
So is that built in, or do you already have it, or?
We do have it.
How would you even track that in?
We actually use deeds, unemployment insurance, wage detail records, and in your packet there should be a thing on college graduate outcomes. I believe we sent that along. Oh yes, deeds website went down, so I have to retype everything. Gov /deed. All right, fine. This is one of the fun parts about IT, right? They informed us yesterday that their website went down. And of course, deed does now not exist. Let me go back. Okay. Okay, Kara, can you remember this? mn.gov/deed/data/data tools. mn.gov/deed/data tools. Data. Let's do that. Oh, deed, come on. mn.gov/deed/data/data-tools and delete. There. So this graduate employment outcomes tool, and we'll just look at the snapshot page. It too is interactive, that you can select what year of graduates you'd like to see. These are college graduates. So this is anybody who finished a certificate, diploma, or degree at a Minnesota post-secondary institution since 2007. So what you can look at is we're currently looking at our agriculture and architecture degrees at varying levels, and you can see their salaries over time, 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years after college graduation.
You can't track that back to high school, right?
We would like to. We would like to. There's a data collection issue. So DEED does not collect dates of birth, only names and social security numbers. And what does K-12 not collect? So someone's got to change. Anyone want to volunteer? Exactly. So we're working through it. But yeah, the two options are K-12 social security numbers, or DEED gets access to occupation as well as date of birth information. So there's kind of a little higher thing on DEED side. By the way, I like to leave that decision to my boss. So, are there other questions?
Seems how all babies born are required to apply for a social security number now. Why hasn't MDE and our school districts, do you pick up social security numbers at MDE somehow?
No. MDE
what-
stopped collecting social security numbers about a decade ago. And that was based on a directive by the Social Security Administration and the U.S. Department of Education that K-12 was not adequately protecting those numbers. And so the policy change was that do you need to collect them? And at that time it was believed no.
That would change the world, wouldn't it?
It would kind of make data linking a lot easier.
And so have you gone back and reapplied to see if you have in place adequate protections so we can start using social security numbers?
We have started the discussion, yes. Yes.
But it still would just be voluntary. No one would be required to report their social security number
Yes.
to the Department of Education. So we would be able to collect some, but it's not gonna be a silver bullet. We're not gonna be able to collect everybody's in a uniform.
Correct. It is.
We still have the option of not filling that out.
It is not mandatory in post-secondary as well. Typically, those students need financial aid, and that's when it becomes mandatory, is when you apply for financial aid. So, that is a great question. No. We have about 95% though. Just Minnesota gives a lot of financial aid. We make it very financially incentive to apply for financial aid in Minnesota. So. We are working with researchers at the K-12 schools, as well as just a variety of groups. So as questions allow, we are going out to like the Minnesota Assessment Group, the School Board Association Conference, Secondary School Principals. There's a number of conferences we'll be at. So let your staff know and ask us for questions. Thank you.